Savia Grant, a black woman and owner of a small bookstore called Stories from the Heart, suddenly begins receiving anonymous love letters. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee blends with the distinct aroma of old books, creating a cozy atmosphere that pervades every corner of the bookstore. Savia takes a deep breath, letting the familiar scent permeate her cells as she gently runs her hand over the spine of an old, worn novel. This bookstore is more than just a business, it is her lifelong dream, brought to life through oak shelves and faded Persian rugs. Outside, the streets of Maplewood, New Jersey are slowly waking up to the warm light of a June morning. Early morning visitors have begun to stroll down Maple Street, taking in the charming shops and cafes that make this city so special. But for Savia, the real treasure lies here, among the yellowing pages and the stories waiting to be discovered. As she sorts through the new batch of books, Savia can't help but smile as she thinks about how her life has changed in recent years. At 32, she finally felt like she was on the right track, living the life she had always dreamed of. Of course, not everything was perfect. The shadow of a new bookstore chain threatening to open in town still haunted her. But Savia was determined not to let that dim her joy. "Good morning, Ms. Literature," the cheerful voice of Naomi, her best friend and only employee, echoed through the empty store. Ready for another day of adventures among the pages of books? Savia laughed and shook her head. "Naomi, you know you don't have to come this early. The store doesn't open until 9, and miss the chance to drink the best coffee in town." "No way," Naomi replied, raising her coffee cup. "Plus, someone needs to make sure you don't get lost in the books and forget to open the store." The two laughed, their friendship having been built over the years since college. Naomi, with her red hair always tousled and freckles dancing across her face, was very different from Savia in many ways. Where Savia was quiet and thoughtful, Naomi was lively and impulsive. However, they shared an unconditional love of literature and a strong loyalty to each other. "Any interesting news?" Naomi asked as she sat down at the counter and swung her legs like an excited child. Savia was about to reply when something caught her eye. Amidst the pages of the book she was holding, a cream-colored envelope stood out. Curious, she gently pulled it out. "What is this?" Naomi leaned forward, curious. Carefully, Savia opened the envelope and took out a folded piece of paper. As she opened it, her eyes followed the lines written in delicate handwriting. "In the pages of time I find your eyes, a smile brighter than the moonlight. Between verses and prose my heart is lost in your freedom, which surpasses all." Savia felt her heart pounding. The poem was beautiful, touching, and anonymous. "Wow," Naomi exclaimed as she read over Savia's shoulder. "Looks like someone has a secret admirer." "Don't be silly," Savia replied, trying to hide the blush spreading across her cheeks. "Maybe some customer just forgot it here." But even as she said that, Savia couldn't help but feel butterflies in her stomach. Who wrote those touching words? The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Daniel Reynolds, the charming chef from the restaurant next door, entered the bookstore with his signature smile. "Good morning, neighbor," he greeted, his green eyes shining with a mixture of kindness and something Savia couldn't quite decipher. "I came to see if you had any new French cookbooks. I've been thinking about adding a few classics to the menu." Savia quickly tucked the letter into her apron pocket, hoping Daniel wouldn't notice. "Of course, Daniel. I think I have what you need." As she moved between the shelves, aware of Daniel's eyes following her, Savia couldn't help but think about the letter. Could it be? No, she dismissed the thought. Daniel was just a good friend and neighbor, nothing more. As the next few hours passed quickly with customers, book recommendations, and lively conversations, but the letter was always on her mind, a constant presence that made her smile at the most unexpected moments. In the afternoon, as the store gradually quieted down, Savia found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. Across the street, an eye-catching sign announced Mega Books coming soon, the largest bookstore chain in the country. The reality of the threat to her small business came back full circle. How could she compete with a large corporation? Tales from the Heart wasn't just a store, it was a haven. A place where people came not just to buy books, but to share stories, to find comfort and inspiration. "Don't let this get you down," Naomi's gentle voice cut through her dark thoughts. "Our store has something no big chain has you." Savia smiled gratefully at her friend. "Thanks, Naomi. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being silly trying to keep this place going." "Silly? You've got to be kidding," Naomi laughed. "Savia Grant, you're the most determined and passionate person I know. If anyone can keep this store alive, it's you." Naomi's words warmed Savia's heart, reminding her why she'd worked so hard to make her dream a reality. She looked around the store, at the shelves filled with stories waiting to be discovered, the cozy nooks where customers could get lost for hours, and the small cafe in the back, where the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the smell of books. "You're right," Savia said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm not giving up without a fight." Just then, as if the universe was affirming her decision, the doorbell rang again. A young woman walked in, her eyes shining with excitement. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "I heard this is the best bookstore in town for poetry. I'm looking for something special for my grandmother." Savia smiled, feeling energized. "You've come to the right place. Let me introduce you to some of our favorite collections." As she guided customers through the shelves, sharing recommendations and stories behind each book, Savia felt her pulse. The mysterious letter in her pocket seemed to be pulsing, reminding her that there was still magic and mystery in this world. At the end of the day, after closing up shop and saying goodbye to Naomi, Savia walked slowly home. The streets of Maplewood were quiet in the twilight. The fresh air from Vermont Lake gently caressed her face, carrying the promise of new beginnings. When she got home, she took the letter out of her pocket and read it again, letting the words dance in her mind. Someone had touched something deep within her soul. For the first time in a long time, Savia allowed herself to daydream, not only about the success of her bookstore, but also about the possibility of a love that understood her completely. With a smile on her face, she fell asleep, the verses of the letter echoing in her dreams, mingling with images of books, smiling customers, and, strangely, Daniel's gentle smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities, and Savia was ready for them all. The aroma of freshly baked croissants wafted through the Maplewood morning air. Daniel Reynolds adjusted his apron, noticing with satisfaction the line of people forming outside his restaurant, Le Petit Chateau. The Vermont sun was shining on the lake, promising another wonderful summer day. As he prepared lunch, Daniel couldn't get the image of Savia holding that mysterious letter out of his mind. He'd noticed the blush on her cheeks, the sparkle in her brown eyes. A sudden pang of jealousy washed over him, surprising him by its intensity. "Chef, we've had a problem with our cheese supplier, Jesus Chef," Olivia announced, interrupting his thoughts. What Daniel sighed, forcing himself back to reality. "What's going on this time?" "The cheese you asked for in the new order," Olivia explained with a frown. "They suggested replacing it with gyr." No, David muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "It won't taste the same. I'll have to rethink today's entire menu." As David worked through the calculations and substitutions, his mind wandered to the past, to summers in Paris, learning from the best chefs in Europe, to dreams of owning his own Michelin-starred restaurant, and to the voice of his mother, Alexandra, echoing in his ears, "David, dear, you have the potential to be one of the greatest chefs in the world. Don't waste your talent in a small town." The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his mother. David picked up, trying to keep his voice steady. "David, honey," Alexandra's sweet voice said on the other end. "How's your favorite starred chef?" David took a deep breath. "I'm fine, Mom. The restaurant is as busy as ever." "Oh, that's great," she said, but David could sense a but coming. "You know, I was just talking to Jean-Pierre Dubois, remember him? The New York restaurateur. Oh, and he mentioned that he was looking for an executive chef for his new venture in Chicago. I immediately thought of you, honey." David's stomach clenched. Chicago, the big city, the famous restaurants, the important critics, everything he'd ever dreamed of, or at least what his mother had always dreamed of for him. "Thanks, Mom, but I'm happy here in Maplewood." "Le Petit Chateau is doing well," and Alexandra interrupted him, her voice now tinged with impatience. "You can't stay in this small town forever. Think about your future, about the legacy you can build." Before David could reply, the doorbell rang behind him. Through the kitchen window, he saw Savia standing outside with a basket. "Mom, I have to go. I have a client waiting," he said quickly. "We'll talk later," and hung up before Alexandra could protest. David ran to the back door, his heart racing, and not from the rush from the kitchen. "Sava," he exclaimed, an involuntary smile on his lips. "What a pleasant surprise!" Zavia smiled back, her eyes shining with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "Hello, David. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Never," he replied, perhaps a little too quickly. Taking a breath, he continued, "What brings you here so early?" Savia lifted the basket she was holding. "Oh, I was sorting through some shelves in the bookstore and found this." She pulled out an old book with a worn leather cover. "It's a 19th century French recipe book. I thought you might like to look through it." David held the book reverently, his fingers brushing Zavia's for a moment, and a current seemed to run through them. "Zavia, this is amazing," he whispered, flipping through the yellowed pages carefully. "Where did you get it?" He'd noticed that her eyes seemed to contain all the browns of autumn. Back in the kitchen, David felt energized in a way no amount of coffee could. His worries about suppliers and his mother's expectations were now distant. "Olivia," he called to his sous chef, "changed the menu plans for today. We're doing something special." As David immersed himself in the pages of old books, he wondered if Xavier knew how much she had affected him. Every smile, every chance conversation seemed to light up his world in a way that no compliment from a food critic could. The day passed in a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. As the evening drew near, David found himself looking out the kitchen window at Tales from the Heart. He watched Xavier interact with customers, her face lighting up as she discussed books, shared recommendations, and laughed with her friend Naomi. That's when he noticed the Mega Books Your New Literary Home sign across the street in large letters. David saw the moment Xavier noticed too, her shoulders slumping slightly, and even from a distance he could sense her anxiety. His determination grew. Tonight would be more than just a dinner or a thank you for the book. It would be a chance to show Xavier that she wasn't alone, that her passion and dedication were not only appreciated by her customers, but also by him. As the last luncheon guest left, David began to prepare for the special dinner. Each dish was carefully selected from the old book, but with a modern twist that he hoped would impress Xavier. At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. David took a deep breath, straightened his chef's uniform, and went to greet the special guest. Xavier looked stunning in a simple yet elegant dress, her curls loose, framing her face in a way that made David's heart skip a beat. "Welcome to Le Petit Chateau," he said, bowing exaggeratedly, making Xavier laugh. "Thank you, Chef Matthews," she replied as she entered the restaurant, now decorated just for her. As he led her to her table, David couldn't help but notice that she seemed to belong here, as if she had always been a part of his life. "So Xavier," she began, her eyes shining with curiosity, "what has our talented chef prepared today?" David smiled, feeling more relieved than ever. "Thanks to a mysterious book that has found its way into my hands, we are going on a culinary journey through 19th century France." As he serves the appetizer, a reenactment of Oran onion soup, David wishes the moment could last forever. Their conversation flows naturally from books to food, from childhood dreams to hopes for the future. It was only as they were enjoying dessert, a cherry clafoutis with a hint of lavender, that David found the courage to bring up the subject that had been bothering him. "Siva," he began hesitantly, "I saw a poster for the new bookstore today." Xavier's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, that. I guess a little healthy competition never hurt anyone, right?" David could see the worry behind her words. "You know, you're not alone in this. Tales from the Heart is special. It's the heart of this community. No big network can replace that." Sylvia's eyes welled up with tears, but she fought back the urge to shed them. "Thank you, David. It means a lot to me." In that moment, looking at Xavier in the candlelight, David felt something change inside him. His mother's expectations, his dreams of culinary stardom, all became unimportant compared to his desire to see Xavier smile, to protect and support her. As the evening drew to a close, and they said their goodbyes at the restaurant's door, David felt the weight of the letter he had written still in his pocket. The letter he had not yet had the courage to send, but which contained all the words his heart longed to say. "Good night, Xavier," he said softly, "and thank you, not just for the book, but for everything." Xavier smiled, a smile that lit up the night around her. "Good night, David, and thank you. It's hidden behind some novels. I think it's been there for years," she explained, watching David's surprised expression. "I thought of you immediately when I saw it." David's heart jumped. She had thought of him. "That's very kind of you," he said, trying to keep his composure. "Why don't you come in? I can buy you a coffee, and we can look through it together." Xavier hesitated for a moment, her eyes drifting to the bookstore across the street. "I'd love to, but I need to open soon." "Of course," David replied, trying to hide his disappointment. "How about dinner here tonight? I can prepare something inspired by this book to thank you." Xavier's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment David feared he had been too bold. But then a shy smile spread across her face. "That was great," she replied softly. As they parted with the promise of dinner, David couldn't help but notice how the morning sun made Xavier's dark curls shine. It was magical as he watched Xavier's footsteps return home. David silently promised himself that he would find a way to help her save her bookstore, Tales from the Heart, and perhaps in the process, find the courage to express his true feelings. With one last look at Tales from the Heart across the street, David returned to his kitchen, his sanctuary, with a heart full of hope and determination. The future might be uncertain, but one thing he knew for sure: Xavier Grant had become the most important part of his life, and he would do anything to not lose her. Morning came in Maplewood with a misty haze covering the Vermont lake. Sevilla woke up with a light heart, the memories of dinner with David still fresh in her mind. She stretched, an unconscious smile on her lips as she recalled every moment of the night before. As she prepared for a new day of work at the bookstore, Sevilla couldn't help but notice that the colors around her seemed brighter, the air seemed sweeter. It was as if the world was in tune with the joy that filled her. However, when she arrived at Tales from the Heart, reality hit her hard. The sign announcing the arrival of Mega Books looked larger and more menacing in the morning light. Sevilla took a deep breath, determined not to let it overshadow her good mood. "Good morning, sunshine," Naomi's cheerful voice greeted her as soon as she entered the store. "Looks like someone had a great evening." Sevilla blushed, trying to hide her smile as she hung up her coat. "It's just dinner, Naomi. No big deal." "Oh, really?" Naomi raised an eyebrow, a mischievous smile on her lips. "And that's why you're so radiant this morning." Before Sevilla could answer, the doorbell rang. A tall man in a well-tailored suit entered the shop, his eyes scanning the room appraisingly. "Good morning, ladies," he said, his voice soft but authoritative. "I'm looking for the owner, Sevilla Grant." Sevilla stepped forward, holding out her hand. "It's me. How can I help you?" The man smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus Wellington from Mega Books." "Nice to meet you at last, Miss Grant." Sevilla's heart sank. So this was the face behind the threat to her beloved bookstore. "Mr. Wellington," she replied, keeping her cool. "What brings you to our humble shop?" Marcus looked around again, his eyes lingering on the cozy nooks and carefully selected shelves. "I have come to make a proposition, Miss Grant, one that I believe will be mutually beneficial." Sevilla exchanged a quick glance with Naomi, who looked as nervous as she felt. "Let us talk in my office." As she led Marcus into the back of the store, Sevilla felt as if she were leading a wolf into a den. The office was small and cozy, with walls covered in posters of classic books and an antique desk she'd inherited from her grandfather. "So, Mr. Wellington," Sevilla began as she sat down behind the desk, "what's your proposal?" Marcus took the chair across from her, his eyes taking in every detail of the space. "Miss Grant, I'll be frank. Mega Books is expanding rapidly, and Maplewood is a market we're very interested in. Your bookstore, well, it has charm. I can't deny that. But the future lies in large chains with variety and competitive prices." Sevilla felt a knot forming in her stomach. "And where exactly do I fit into that future?" "We want to buy your bookstore," Marcus said in a tone as if he were discussing the weather. "We're offering a fair price, well above market value. Furthermore, we're willing to offer you a management position in our new store. Your local knowledge will be invaluable." For a moment, Sevilla was speechless. The offer was tempting, she had to admit. The money would solve many of her financial worries and the security of a job in a large corporation. But then memories flooded back to her. Her grandmother's smile when she talked about her dream of opening a bookstore, the countless customers who had become friends over the years, the sense of accomplishment she felt when she helped someone find the perfect book, and most recently, David's admiring gaze when he talked about the specialness of Tales from the Heart. "Mr. Wellington." Sevilla began, her voice firm. "I appreciate your offer, but I'm afraid I have to turn it down. This bookstore is more than a business to me, it's a dream, a legacy, an important part of this community." Marcus didn't seem surprised by her refusal, he just smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I understand your sentiment, Miss Grant, but I advise you to think carefully. The market is changing, and small, independent bookstores are becoming obsolete. Our offer won't be on the table forever." With that, he stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Think about it. I'll be in town for a few more days. Here's my card in case you change your mind." After Marcus left, Sevilla remained seated, the card in her hand as heavy as if it were made of lead. The reality of the situation hit her with full force. Mega Books was no longer a distant threat, but now a clear, tangible, determined reality. Naomi entered the office, her face full of concern. "Sava, is everything okay? What does he want?" Sevilla looked up, feeling suddenly tired. "They want to buy the bookstore, Naomi. They offered a large sum of money, and even offered me a job." "What?" Naomi exclaimed, surprised. "You're not going to consider it?" "Of course not," Sevilla replied, but her voice reflected a hint of hesitation. "But ... what if they're right? What if small bookstores like ours really are going to fail?" Naomi knelt down next to Sevilla's chair, taking her hand. "Hey, look at me. This bookstore is special. It's more than a business, it's the heart of this community. No big chain store can replace what we have here." Naomi's words echoed what David had said the night before, bringing Savia some comfort. She squeezed her friend's hand, grateful for her support. "You're right," Savia said, her eyes lighting up with a new fire. "We shouldn't give up without a fight." The rest of the day passed in a busy rush of clients and books, but Savia's mind was far away, planning and figuring out how to compete with the corporate giant that threatened to swallow her dream. When night fell and it was time to close, Savia found herself hesitating outside the shop. The thought of returning home to silence and solitude seemed unbearable at the moment. Almost without thinking, her feet led her to Le Petit Chateau. The kitchen light was still on, and through the window she could see David at work, completely absorbed in his culinary art. Savia knocked lightly on the back door. When David saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her heart pound. "Savia," he exclaimed, opening the door. "What a pleasant surprise. Is everything okay?" She hesitated for a moment, feeling suddenly vulnerable. I've had a rough day. I guess I just needed to see a friendly face." David's expression softened, concern evident in his eyes. "Come in, I'll make us some tea." As she sat down on a kitchen chair, watching David move easily between the stove and the table, Savia felt a wave of peace wash over her. There was something comforting in the familiarity of the space, in the scents wafting through the air, and in David's quiet presence. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" David asked gently, placing a steaming cup of chamomile tea in front of her. Savia took a sip, letting the warmth of the drink warm her from within. Then the words began to flow. She told David about Marcus's visit, about the offer from Mega Books, about her fears and doubts. David listened intently, his eyes never leaving her. When Savia finished, he was silent for a moment, as if carefully considering his next words. "Savia," he began, his voice full of emotion, "you are the most passionate and dedicated person I have ever met. The bookstore, it is an extension of who you are, a place of magic and discovery and connection. No big chain store can replicate that." He paused, taking her hand in his. "I believe in you, and I am not the only one. This whole community believes in you and what your bookstore represents." David's words touched something deep inside Savia. Tears she hadn't known she was holding back began to fall. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "It means so much to me." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with unspoken emotion. Savia could feel her heart beating fast, aware of David's closeness, the warmth of his hands. It was then that her eyes fell on a piece of paper on the desk. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was the same handwriting as the mysterious letters she'd received. "David," she said slowly, her voice barely audible. That handwriting. David's eyes followed hers, and she saw the exact moment he realized what she had. His face paled, and he quickly let go of her hand. "Savia, But before he could continue, the phone in the kitchen rang, breaking the moment. David stared at the phone, as if it were a snake about to strike. I need to take this call," he said, his voice shaking. "It's probably my mom. She's been calling a lot lately." Savia nodded, feeling suddenly disoriented as David picked up and spoke in a low, strained voice. She tried to process what she had just discovered. David was the author of the letters, the one who had made her daydream, the one who had touched her heart with his touching poetry, and he was just a few feet away. When David hung up, his face was conflicted. "Savia, but she cut him off, standing abruptly. "It's late. I should go." "Wait," David said, stepping toward her. "Please, let me explain." Savia hesitated, her heart in turmoil. Part of her wanted to stay, to hear what David had to say, but the other part was frightened by the intensity of the emotions she was experiencing. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "we can talk tomorrow." With that, she hurried out of the kitchen, the cool night air hitting her hot face as she walked home. Her mind was racing with thoughts of the threatened bookstore, giant corporations, and secret love letters. One thing was certain: life in Maplewood was about to get a lot more complicated. Dawn brought a storm, dark clouds hanging over Maplewood like a warning. Savia watched the raindrops fall on her bedroom window, her mood as gray as the sky outside. It had been a long night filled with chaotic thoughts about David, the letters, and the uncertain future of the bookstore she loved. Sighing, she forced herself to stand. Tales from the Heart wouldn't open on its own, and Savia knew she needed to keep her spirits up, especially now. When she arrived at the bookstore, Savia was greeted by Naomi, who immediately recognized her mood. "Oh, my," Naomi said, frowning. "I know that look. What happened?" Savia hesitated, not knowing where to start. "It's complicated. As complicated as that Russian novel you keep trying to get me to read, or as complicated as finding out that the neighbor's cat is actually an international spy," Naomi joked, trying to make Savia laugh. Savia laughed anyway. "Maybe it's the complicated Russian romance." She paused, looking around to make sure no customers were in the store. David, he's the author of the letters. Naomi's eyes widened. What? How did you know? Sevilla told Naomi about the night before, about seeing David's handwriting and his reaction, and now I don't know what to think or feel. Why didn't he tell me? Why all this mystery? Naomi put a comforting hand on Sevia's shoulder. Oh, men sometimes do stupid things when they're in love. Maybe he's afraid to open up completely. Maybe Zavia whispered, not entirely convinced. But with all that's going on with Mega Books, I don't know if I can take any more of it, the troubles in her life right now. As if summoned by her words, the doorbell rang and Marcus Wellington walked in, waving his umbrella. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The weather's terrible, isn't it?" Sevilla straightened her back, determined not to show weakness. "Mr. Wellington, how can I help you today?" Marcus glanced around the nearly empty store. "I just stopped by to see if you'd reconsidered our offer. These days must be tough for small businesses." Before Xavier could reply, the door opened again and David walked in, his dark hair wet from the rain, his eyes meeting Sevilla's immediately. The air in the bookstore seemed charged. Sevilla felt her heart pounding, a mixture of emotions, joy, hurt, and confusion filling her chest. "Sorry, I didn't know you were busy," David said, his voice strained, his gaze shifting to Marcus, a look of doubt on his face. Marcus, for his part, looked confused by David's presence. "Ah, you must be Chef Matthews. I've heard good things about your restaurant." David nodded stiffly. "Thanks." "And you?" "Marcus Wellington, from Mega Books," he replied, holding out his hand. "We're opening a branch here in Maplewood." David's expression hardened noticeably, and he shook Marcus's hand briefly before turning to Xavier. "May I speak to you privately for a moment?" Xavier hesitated, torn between her desire to hear what David had to say and her reluctance to leave Marcus alone in her shop. "Why don't we go into my office?" she finally suggested. Turning to Marcus, she added, "Mr. Wellington, could you give us a few minutes?" Marcus smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made Xavier feel uncomfortable. Of course. I'll take the opportunity to look through the books. It's always good to meet competitors." In the small office at the back of the shop, Xavier and David stood across from each other, the air heavy with unspoken words. Sevilla, David began, running a hand through his damp hair. "About last night, about the letters. I've wanted to tell you, but there never seemed to be a good time." Xavier crossed her arms, creating a protective barrier against the storm of emotions that threatened to spill over. "Why, David? Why the anonymous letters? Why didn't you talk to me?" David took a step forward, his eyes pleading for understanding. "Because you scare me, Xavier. What I feel for you. It's stronger, deeper than anything I've ever felt, and with all the pressure from my mother, the expectations. I thought if I could express my feelings through letters, it would be safer for both of us." Xavier felt her resolve waver, the vulnerability in David's voice, the sincerity in his eyes. It was hard to keep her defenses up. "David, but before she could continue, a shout from the store interrupted them. "Xavier, you need to see this." Panicked, Xavier ran back into the store, David close behind. What they saw made their hearts sink. Marcus was standing near the store window, a triumphant smile on his face. Outside, through the rain, they could see a giant banner being raised on the building opposite Mega Books, opening in 30 days. "Well," Marcus said, his voice full of false sympathy, "it looks like your time is running out, Ms. Grant. Maybe it's time to reconsider my offer." Sevilla felt as if the ground was disappearing from beneath her feet. 30 days. How could she compete with a giant corporation in just 30 days? It was then that she felt a warm, firm hand on her back. David was beside her, his face full of determination. "She doesn't need to reconsider," he said, his voice filled with the confidence Xavier didn't sense. "Tales from the Heart isn't just a bookstore, it's the heart of this community, and we're going to fight for it." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Great spirit, Chef Matthews, but business is business, and in the end, profits are what matter." With a nod, Marcus left the store, leaving a heavy silence behind. Xavier turned to David, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" David pulled her into a tight hug, and Xavier let herself sink into his warmth for a moment. "We'll fight," he whispered into her hair. Together in that moment, as the rain fell outside and the world seemed to be collapsing around them, Xavier felt a glimmer of hope in her chest. Maybe, with David by their side, they could find a way to save the bookstore. The rest of the day passed in a frenzy of activity. Xavier, David, and Naomi sat around the small table in the office, brainstorming ideas to attract more customers and compete with Mega Books. "Why don't we have a literary festival?" Naomi suggested, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "We could invite local authors, have readings and writing workshops." "That would be great," Naomi Savia exclaimed, feeling excited for the first time in days. "And we could partner with other local businesses." "David, you could prepare dishes inspired by famous books." David nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "I love that idea. We can make it a community event, showing everyone what makes Maplewood and Tales from the Heart so special." As they continued to plan, Savia felt a wave of gratitude wash over her for having such wonderful people in her life. Naomi with her unwavering loyalty and creative ideas, and David, who had touched her heart with his poetry, were now by her side, ready to fight. As the night fell and the storm finally began to subside, Savia found herself with David once more. Naomi had gone home, leaving the two of them to finalize some of the final details. "David," Savia began, her voice soft about the letters. He looked at her, his eyes full of emotion. "Savia, I know I've made things complicated, but every word I wrote is true. You brighten my days, inspire my creativity, make me want to be a better person." Savia felt her heart beat faster. "Those letters meant so much to me, and knowing they were from you made them that much more special." David took a step toward her, hesitant. "So you're not mad at me?" she smiled, shaking her head. "No. Maybe I'm a little confused and a little hurt that you didn't tell me sooner, but not mad." He reached out, gently touching her face. "I promise that from now on I'll be completely honest with you. No more secrets." Savia leaned into his hand, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she saw David looking at her with such tenderness that it almost took her breath away. Slowly, as if they were in a dream, they moved closer, and their lips met in a soft kiss, full of promise and hope. When they pulled apart, Savia chuckled. "Well, I guess that complicates things even more." David smiled, stroking her cheek. "Maybe, but I think it's worth it." That evening, as Savia walked home under the sky that had finally begun to lighten, she felt a mixture of fear and hope. The next 30 days would certainly be a challenge, but with David by her side and the support of her community, she was ready to face anything. Tales from the Heart was more than a bookstore. It was a dream, a legacy, a place of love and connection, and Savia was determined to fight for it with everything she had. The sun rose over Maplewood, its golden rays clearing away the last traces of the previous day's storm. Savia woke up with a new determination shining in her eyes. The past few days had been an emotional roller coaster, but now she had a clear goal to save Tales from the Heart and prove that the heart of a community could not be bought by a large corporation. When she arrived at the bookstore, Savia was greeted by a sight that stopped her in her tracks. A line of people stretched out on the sidewalk, all eagerly waiting for the bookstore to open. "What's going on?" she muttered to herself, hastily unlocking the door. Naomi was inside, a huge smile on her face. "Surprise," she exclaimed. "I've been on social media all night telling people about our situation and about this literary festival we're planning." The response has been incredible. Savia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "Naomi, you're amazing." As customers poured in, Savia was touched by the words of encouragement and support. People she'd known for years and even people she'd never met before all expressed their love for Tales from the Heart and their desire to help. Mid-morning, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of David. He was carrying a covered basket and had a mischievous glint in his eye. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted as he approached the counter where Savia and Naomi stood. "I'm giving our loyal customers a little boost." He opened the basket, revealing dozens of mini blueberry muffins still warm from the oven. The delicious aroma wafted through the store, making everyone's stomachs growl with hunger. "David, this is wonderful," Savia exclaimed, touched by the gesture. He smiled, leaning down to give her a quick kiss on the cheek. "This is just the beginning. I've been thinking about the festival and have a few ideas I'd like to discuss with you." As Naomi handed out muffins to grateful customers, Savia and David retreated to a quiet corner of the store. "What ideas do you have?" Savia asked, curious. David's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Why not turn the festival into an event that celebrates the history and culture of Maplewood? We could invite local authors to speak about the area, partner with other businesses to create unique experiences. Imagine a literary tour of the city, with stops at landmarks mentioned in famous books written here." Savia felt her heart swell with hope and excitement. "David, that's a great idea. We could really show people what makes our community special." They spent the next hour sketching out ideas, their faces close together as they scribbled notes in their notebooks. The energy between them was palpable, a mix of shared creativity and undeniable attraction. However, their happy bubble was broken by the sound of the door opening loudly. Marcus Wellington walked in, his cold gaze sweeping the crowded store. Well, he said, his voice filled with fake surprise. "Looks like someone's having a good time." Savia stood, determined not to let Marcus intimidate her. "Mr. Wellington, as you can see, we're busy. Is there anything specific I can help you with?" Marcus smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just stopping by to see how things are going. I see you're working hard. It's heartwarming." David stood beside Savia, his presence a quiet source of strength. "Tales from the Heart has the support of the entire community, Mr. Wellington. That's something money can't buy." Marcus's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Ah, yes, community, a beautiful concept, isn't it? But in the end, numbers don't lie." And as if to prove it, he pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "I have a new offer for you, Ms. Grant. I advise you to read it carefully. The market is changing rapidly and opportunities like this don't come along often." Savia took the envelope with trembling fingers, feeling its weight as if it were made of lead. "Thank you, Mr. Wellington. I will consider it." Marcus nodded, satisfied. "That's all I ask. And good luck with your festival. I'm sure it will be a wonderful event." With that, he turned and left the store, leaving a tense silence behind him. As soon as the door closed behind Marcus, Naomi approached. "What is it?" A new offer. Savia looked at the envelope in her hand, feeling suddenly tired. "I don't know, but I'm afraid to know." David placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to open it now. In fact, you don't have to open it at all if you don't want to." Savia shook her head, straightening her back. "No, I need to know what we're dealing with, but not here, not now." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. The store still packed with customers showing their support in every way they could. Some bought extra books, others left donations for the festival, and many simply shared stories of what Tales from the Heart meant to them. When it was finally time to close, Savia, David, and Naomi were exhausted but exhilarated. The first day of the fight against Mega Books had been an undeniable success. So Naomi said with a mischievous smile, glancing at Savia and David, "What are your plans for tonight, I suppose?" Savia blushed, exchanging a quick glance with David. "Actually, I was thinking of inviting you two to dinner. We have a lot to discuss about the festival." David smiled, his eyes sparkling with affection. "That sounds great. How about Le Petit Chateau? I can prepare something special for us." An hour later, the three of them were sitting in the cozy kitchen of David's restaurant, enjoying wild mushroom risotto and discussing the plans for the festival animatedly. "So we've decided that the festival will last 3 days?" Naomi asked, sipping her wine. Savia nodded, feeling energized despite the long day. "Yes, we'll start on Friday night with a reception. David will prepare dishes inspired by famous books, and on Saturday we'll have a literary tour of the city, followed by talks and workshops with local authors." David added, "And on Sunday we'll end with an outdoor book market and musical performances." As they discussed the details, Savia felt a wave of gratitude for having such wonderful people by her side. However, the shadow of the envelope Marcus had given her still hung over her. As if reading her mind, David placed his hand on hers. "Savia, about that offer," she took a deep breath, pulling the envelope out of her bag. "I think it's time we face it, right?" With trembling hands, Savia opened the envelope and unfolded the document inside. As her eyes scanned the words, her expression changed from worry to shock. "What's going on?" Naomi asked, leaning forward nervously. Savia swallowed, her voice barely audible. "They tripled the original offer, and they're also offering a management position in Mega Books' rare book department." Silence fell over the kitchen, heavy and stifling. David was the first to break it. "Savia," he said softly, "what are you thinking?" She looked at him, her eyes conflicted. I don't know. It's an amount of money that could solve all my financial problems, and that position, it's something I've always dreamed of." Naomi leaned over, taking Savia's other hand. "But at a cost, right? You'll have to give up Tales from the Heart." Savia nodded, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, and it won't just be the bookstore. It will be everything. This community, the people, the dreams we've built together." David squeezed her hand gently. "Savia, no one can make this decision for you. But know that, whatever you choose, we'll be here for you." Savia looked at her two best friends, feeling the weight of the decision before her. Financial security and a dream job on one side, and the heart of the community and an uncertain but loving future on the other. "I need time," she said finally, "to think, to really consider what this all means." Naomi and David nodded, understanding. The rest of the evening passed in lighter conversation, but Savia could feel the weight of that decision weighing on her. Afterwards, as David walked her home, they walked hand in hand in silence. At her door, Savia turned to him. "David," she began, her voice trembling. He cut her off with a soft kiss. "Shh. You don't have to say anything now. Just know that, no matter what happens, what I feel for you is true. The words in the letters, the moments we shared, it was all true. Sevilla let herself sink into his arms for a moment, finding comfort in his warmth. When they finally separated, she saw a mix of love and worry in his eyes. "Good night, Sevilla," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Good night, David," she replied, watching him walk away before entering the house. Alone in her room, Sevilla took out the box containing the letters. Her heels clicked on the wooden floor, adding to the tense atmosphere. "David, dear," Alexandra said, her voice soft but tinged with displeasure, "so this is where you spend all your time." David looked uncomfortable, clearly torn between his mother and Sevilla. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Alexandra entered the store, her gait graceful but somewhat assertive. "I heard about your literary festival and thought it would be interesting to stop by and see what you were up to." Her gaze swept the cozy space of Tales from the Heart but couldn't hide her careful assessment. Sevilla stood there, feeling the tension growing in the air. She tried to keep her composure, remembering Lisa's words of encouragement and the love David had expressed through his letters. "Hello, Mrs. Matthews," Sevilla said, trying to keep her voice even. "It's nice to meet you. David has been a big part of the success of this festival." Alexandra smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Very well," she said, "but I wonder if my son's contributions might be better used elsewhere." David stepped forward, placing his hand on Sevilla's shoulder in a protective gesture. "Mother, I'm here because I want to be here. Tales from the Heart is more than just a bookstore. It's an important part of this community." Alexandra raised her eyebrows, as if assessing the situation. "Son, I understand that you want to help, but do you think your career, your future, should be a higher priority? A position at a prestigious restaurant in Chicago awaits you." Alexandra's words were like a knife stabbing through the air, causing Sevilla to feel a surge of anxiety. David's future, the career he had built, was in jeopardy. David held Sevilla's hand tightly, his gaze steady. "Mom, I've thought a lot about this. I know you want the best for me, but I have to decide for myself what's best. And right now that means being here, helping Sevilla and Tales from the Heart." Alexandra sighed, looking at her son with hope and disappointment in her eyes. "You've always been a stubborn child, David. I just hope you know what you're doing." Sevilla felt relieved to see David standing firm in his decision, but she also knew that her struggle was not only with Mega Books but also with outside pressures that were affecting the people she loved. "Mrs. Matthews," Sevilla said softly but firmly, "I understand that you're worried about David's future, but I can tell you he's been an integral part of this fight. And with his help, we'll do everything we can to keep Tales from the Heart alive and well." Alexandra looked at Sevilla for a long moment before nodding slightly. "We'll see," she said, her voice seeming to mix acceptance and warning. As Alexandra turned to leave the store, Sevilla and David stood there in silence for a moment, aware that another battle had just ended. But in David's eyes, Sevilla saw a new determination, an unbreakable loyalty. "I'm so proud of you," Sevilla said, looking into David's eyes. "I know this isn't easy for you." David chuckled, taking her hand. "We'll get through this, Sevilla. Together." The afternoon continued with the final preparations for the festival, but Sevilla knew in her heart that the most important decision of her life was still waiting, not to be wasted, Miss Carter. Mega Books needed an answer soon if she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. Marcus's voice became sharp, no longer hiding the pressure. Sevilla felt as if she was being pulled in two opposing directions. On one side was the financial security and professional recognition that the Mega Books offer would bring, and on the other was the love of the community and the possibility of building a future with David. David looked at Sevilla, his eyes filled with worry, and something else may be hurt. "Sevilla, I didn't know you were considering the offer from Mega Books." Sevilla felt tears welling up in her eyes. "David, but before she could continue, the bookstore door opened again, and this time Marcus Wellington walked in with a cold smile on his face. "Ah, Miss Carter," he said, his tone full of false courtesy. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to stop by and see if you've had a chance to consider our offer. The deadline is approaching, you know." Sevilla looked from Marcus to David, feeling pulled in two completely opposite directions. On one side was the promise of financial security and professional recognition. On the other, the love of a community and the possibility of a future with David. She began, her voice shaking a little. "I need more time," Marcus frowned, all false sympathy gone. "Time is a luxury we cannot afford to waste, Miss Carter. Mega Books needs an answer soon if you want to take advantage of this opportunity." Feeling trapped, Sevilla looked around the bookstore, the place that had become her heart, the place where she had invested so much effort and love. She also looked at David, the person she had gradually developed deeper feelings for, the person who had accompanied her throughout this journey. Savia knew that her decision would affect not only her future, but also the future of those around her. Savia took a deep breath, trying to find clarity in the conflicting thoughts. "Marcus," she said, her voice firmer than before, "I understand the need to make a quick decision, but this is my life, my community, and my dream. I need more time to think things through." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if he was considering something. Finally, he nodded, but he could not hide his dissatisfaction. "Very well, Miss Carter, but remember that time is running out. I will be back soon to get your final answer." With that, Marcus turned and left the store, leaving Savia feeling relieved but also worried. As the door closed behind Marcus, Savia felt the air become more suffocating than ever. She turned to look at David, who was still standing there, his eyes filled with worry and a little heart attack. "David," she whispered, her voice full of conflict, "I really don't know what to do." David stepped forward, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Savia, I know this is a difficult decision, but whatever you choose, remember that we will always be here, supporting you." Savia looked deep into David's eyes, feeling a little peace amidst the chaos. She knew that no decision was easy, but with the support of David and the community, she would find the right path for herself and for Tales from the Heart. With sharp eyes and careful assessment, their presence in the crowd was a stark reminder of the challenges Savia faces. Savia took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. This was the moment that all her and the community's efforts had led to. The literary festival was more than just an event, it was the last chance to prove that Tales from the Heart was an integral part of Maplewood. Lisa approached Savia, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know you're under a lot of pressure, but remember that everyone is here for you and for this bookstore." David stepped forward as well, his eyes soft but determined. "Savia, no one can make this decision for you, but whatever you choose, we will always support you." Savia felt a wave of determination wash over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger. "I won't let you down." With renewed determination, Savia stepped onto the main stage to open the festival. Applause erupted as she took the microphone, looking out at the crowd she loved. "Hello, everyone," she began, her voice stronger than ever. "Tales from the Heart is not just a bookstore, it is the heart of this community. This literary festival is not just about celebrating literature, it is about celebrating the power of community, love, and unity." As she spoke, Savia could see Marcus standing behind her, his expression still filled with displeasure, while Alexandra stood to the side, watching with an unreadable appraisal. "We have been through many challenges," Savia continued, "but with all of your support, we will not only overcome them, but emerge stronger." Applause broke out as Savia finished her speech. She felt a new strength surge through her. This was her fight, and she was ready to face it. Throughout the day, Savia busied herself with running the festival, making sure everything ran smoothly. She felt the support of the community, of her close friends, and especially of David, who was always by her side, supporting her in every decision. As the sun set and the crowd began to disperse, Savia knew that the decisive moment was approaching. She realized that the answer had been within her all along. Facing Marcus and Alexandra, she was ready to make her final decision. Marcus stepped forward, a calculating smile on his face. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice filled with false politeness, "I hope you've had enough time to consider." Savia looked Marcus straight in the eye, feeling the determination rising. "Marcus, I have thought it over," she said, her voice firm. "I refuse Mega Book's offer. Tales from the Heart is the heart of this community, and I will not let it be bought by anyone." Surprise flashed across Marcus's face, but he quickly covered it with a cold smile. "You are making a big mistake, Miss Carter. But remember, this decision will affect not only you but the community as well." "It is a risk I am willing to take," Savia replied, her voice filled with determination. David stepped up to Savia, taking her hand firmly. "We're going to fight for Tales from the Heart," he said, his voice full of determination. Alexandra stood there looking at Savia and David with a complicated gaze, as if she were reassessing everything. "You've chosen your path, David," she said softly, but without the same determination. "I hope you know what you're doing." Savia felt a sense of relief, even though she knew the fight was still on. But with David and the community by her side, she was ready to face whatever was coming. As Marcus and Alexandra left, Savia turned to look at David, a small smile on her lips. "We'll do this," she said, and for the first time in weeks she truly believed it. A lightness, a sense of happiness and comfort spreading through her. "Maybe now would be a good time to give them to you," she said, her eyes sparkling with joy. David smiled, squeezing Savia's hand. "I'll give them to you little by little," so that every day will have something to look forward to. Sevilla leaned into David, feeling peace in her heart as she let herself go, finding comfort in his presence. "I'm so happy to have you here, to go through it all with me." "Me too," Sevilla, David whispered, kissing her forehead gently. "We've been through a lot, but I believe the best is yet to come." As they sat there in silence, listening only to the soft rain falling outside the window, Sevilla realized she had made the right decision. Tales from the Heart was more than just a bookstore, it was her home, the place where she had found love, friendship, and the true meaning of life. In the end, everything Ziva had fought to protect had been worth it, and she knew that her and David's future, as well as the future of the bookstore, would be filled with hope and joy. "So how do we continue our story?" David asked, his eyes shining with love and promise. "We will continue to write it," Sevilla replied, her voice filled with determination. "Chapter by chapter, page by page, with love and patience." David smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. "I look forward to every word of our story." With those words, Sevilla knew she had found the most important thing in her life: a trusted companion, a dream nurtured with love and determination, and a promising future for Tales from the Heart, and all who have loved it endlessly. Outside, the stars shone brightly in the Maplewood sky, and inside the small corner bookstore, two hearts beat as one, ready to face whatever the future might bring. Because in the end, love for each other, for books, and for community is the strongest force. And so, in the scent of old books and new opportunities, Zevia and David begin writing the next chapter of their story, a story that, like the best books, promises to be filled with adventure, romance, and above all, love. Did you feel like this story touched your heart? Don't forget to show your support by clicking like. Take advantage of the Super Thanks feature right below the video to directly support the channel and contribute to the production of more interesting content. Subscribe to the channel and remember to activate the bell to always be updated with the latest information. And watch out, a new exciting story is ready to appear on your screen. Your participation means a lot to me, and I hope to have you along soon. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video.